It is April 28th, 2024, and I am in one of my favorite places on earth, Eastern Kentucky. More specifically, Hazard, Kentucky, to see Mandi Fugate Sheffel, the wonderful owner of one of the best independent bookshops in the world, Read Spotted Newt, which also might lay claim to the best logo of any bookshop in the entire world. Now, I had heard about Read Spotted Newt quite a bit before, but I hadn't heard anything about Mandi. And this connection is once again a product of trusting the friendship radar of Annette Sonu Clapsaddle. But we were hiking, Annette and I, on the Bartram Trail in North Carolina, and she kept talking about her friend Mandi. And it was one of those situations where someone's talking with so much love and admiration and respect for a person that you're just really interested. Like, wow, yeah, this sounds like an amazing person. And whenever somebody talks about a person like that, especially someone I respect and admire like Annette, I always make a mental note of it, because you just never know when you're going to meet or connect with people and have a chance to break bread with them. So I, at the time, last summer, hadn't come up with the idea for Books on the Bed. But months later, when I was thinking about how I wanted to bring it all together, structure it, I thought it would be a good idea for every season to feature someone who is not solely an author. Maybe an independent bookstore owner, or a publicist, or librarian. Tons of ways you could take it. But I say not solely an author because Mandi is also a very good writer. And she is a writer of the people. More specifically, the people of her home in Eastern Kentucky. And when you look at Mandi's life at this point, and for years now, everything she does, every role she plays in society, is as an advocate for, a champion and defender of this place, and a sharer of its stories. I mean, Read Spotted Newt is a treasure chest full of Appalachian stories, real ones, by really great authors and people that are from this place. So why would I not want to share that and her work and her life with you? It just made sense to start with Mandi in an Appalachian bookstore, because I live in Appalachia now and I love it. And I want to promote all the great people that live here and do good work here. So that's what I decided on. She was the first person that I asked in that role for every season. So I'm really excited to have Mandi on here. And I just can't stress how beautiful Eastern Kentucky is, how beautiful so many people I've met here are, and how I wish I could come back way more than I actually get to. But, you know, I'm in Hazard now. I started this morning in Red Fox, where Mandi grew up, because it's important to try to understand the places where people are from. Just make an attempt. And I couldn't possibly know, but to see it and try to feel it and touch it, that's a really important thing to me before I meet people. And now in Hazard, where Mandi is doing all this good work. So it's hot as a mug out here, but we're still maintaining. I'm still really excited about this conversation. Can't wait to see what Mandi shares for her Books on the Bed, and share those with you, and really just give you insight into who Mandi is as a person, and the work that she's done, and the writing she's doing and will continue to do. She's a remarkable person. And if you're ever even close to Hazard, Kentucky, and I mean within 100 miles, you should get off the interstate or wherever else you are and come on over here and experience a true Appalachian bookstore full of Appalachian stories, owned by an Appalachian person, and feel the love. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, we're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. we are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. Well, I think I got to set the tone. So I decided to do this. I bring gifts.
Okay.
Because I'm very thankful for you being here.
Yeah.
And I think you're giving these stories as a gift. So, well, the first thing is, I found this funny. I got you. You said you weren't a hot drink gal, which I'm not a hot drink guy, really. I mean, I still do drink hot coffee, but even if it's like dead of winter in Minnesota, I'll drink cold brew. But I was like, okay, I got to bring this so that you can enjoy it.
That's hilarious.
Because it's super hot, too.
Yes.
So,
I came equipped with one wherever it went in the floor.
I was wondering if that what was in the...
Did I tell you this? How did you know this?
I can't give you my sources.
I know where that came from.
Yeah, you probably...
Thank you. That's the perfect gift for me.
I know.
Yes.
I was like, I gotta sweeten you up a little bit.
Right.
I have a second one for you as well to take for the route. And then I have 2 books for you.
Oh, I love it. People don't want to give me books anymore.
It's a little bit tough.
Do you experience that? People just assume because I own the bookstore that they're just like, well, I'm giving you a gift, a book, and I'm like, I'd love to be gifted.
Yeah, that's an interesting
books.
That's an interesting thing because I feel like people think that I read so differently than them that whatever they give me, I'm not going to like. But I think that's the point. Is you should give me something that you think I haven't read.
Yeah.
Because I might really love it.
Yeah.
And so, I get that. But for you, owning a bookstore, maybe it's a little bit more intimidating. Or just thinking it's useless.
And the people think it's useless. They're like, well, and I'm like, that's not... This store is really small. And this is only a fraction of the thousands of books that are released every year.
Yeah.
To think that I'm that well read, one, I'm flattered. Also, that's not true.
Yeah, I think the bookstore owners get maybe too much credit for how much they've read and what. So let me tell you two things about these. Because you're so well read in Appalachian literature,
yes,
I was trying to bring different stories from different regions. You might have read them. If you have, it doesn't necessarily matter because I'm going to then try again. Okay. And I'll send them to you. All
right.
This one...
If it's outside of Appalachia, there's a likelihood that I haven't read it. I've not.
So Willa Cather is one of my 2 favorite authors, her and Eudora Welty.
Yes.
And I lived in rural Nebraska for a year and a half when I was a kid, and I always feel like I was meant to read Willa Cather because she's from rural Nebraska. And this one in particular, I gave you because it's about staying and trying to cultivate land to be viable and productive when everybody else is leaving.
Oh, wow.
And I felt like there's some similarities here with you and what you're doing with the bookstore. And I thought that maybe you'd have a kindred spirit with the protagonist in this.
Yes.
So that's one.
Love that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then this one's a little bit more...
And this paper is wonderful.
Yeah. City Lights, shout out. This one's contemporary, and you probably at least know about it, but similarly with a theme. I haven't
read it either.
I thought that you would relate to this. So Outlawed is about a group of barren women who form an outlaw gang out west in the 1800s. But to me, what's really interesting about this story, more than just that just wild plot line of a retelling of the West, is that it's a lot about, like, what do we want our future to be? Because this isn't good enough, right? If we're running women out of town, calling them witches just because they can't have children, what do we want the future to look like? What's going to be a better future? And I just feel like with this store and this town, there's a lot of imagining going on in Appalachia.
Perfect.
So I thought you would appreciate both of these.
Well, these are great because also, I have a road trip coming up.
Yes, you do.
I have a flight coming up at the end of the week. And,
well, and you got to read this going out west.
These are both perfect for... thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I feel like I may have had this in the store. I don't think we have it now, but
Yeah, I think it came out
Maybe?
January 21. It was a while ago.
Yeah.
So it was early on in your storehood.
Yeah.
But Anna North is cool because she's a journalist.
Yeah.
And she's written so much about gender
Yeah.
and social issues, and you can tell that.
She brings that kind of knowledge.
And it was one of my favorite books I've read in a long time. I hope you appreciate it.
Before we get started. So it doesn't get hot in here.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I'm just always hot in this. Once it gets above 70, I'm just like never not
I'm
hot.
at this age for women that,
Yeah.
pretty much hot all the time.
Sweet. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoy them.
Yes, perfect.
Report back when you do read them, but there's no pressure.
This is like there's no greater gifts.
Yeah.
No greater gifts than Diet Dr. Pepper and books.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
I thought that was a good start. So,
Yeah.
And when I was coming here, so I'm going to interview Charles Baxter in Minnesota in a couple weeks, and I was reading The Soul Thief. Have you heard of that book?
No.
Okay, another out of region one. But there was an interesting part toward the latter half of the book where he'd had a breakdown, and his sister had been like mute for years. Okay, so she's back in Milwaukee, he's out east, he has a breakdown in class, is in the hospital. His sister flies out after all these years of not being able to speak, and she starts reading him stories. And that was interesting because it was the first thing that got her talking is, to help her brother. And she's reading him stories by the bedside, and then he's revived by that. And he says, well, why did you do this? Like, why was this the thing that made you like come alive again? She's like, well, when you used to call me, even though I didn't talk, you would tell me stories from your life. And as I was thinking about that on the way here, it kind of paralleled with how I feel about bookstores, and this one in particular.
Yeah.
In this town of, stories being survival, but also revival, and how this is such a life-giving store. It's small but mighty. And I think that is just a testament to what you thought this could become. And so I just think it's really cool that you did this. And the backstory is one of the more wild stories of this store. And I've been to a lot of indie bookstores, met a lot of bookstore owners. I don't know that any hold a candle to what happened here and how this place survived. So I do want to start before we get to the books on the bed with how this came to be, because I feel like still not enough people across the country know about this, and I will put it out there.
Okay, so I feel like it's a long backstory, and I get this question a lot. When people come in from out of town to visit Hazard, they're like, oh, well, what made you open a bookstore? And so I feel like they have to, I'm like, pull up a chair, because, there is no short answer. It wasn't just, I want to run a business. I like books. We don't have one. It wasn't that simple. And I think the whole story is important. So in the summer of 2019, I went to the Appalachian Writers Workshop at Hyman Settlement School with the encouragement of Gurney Norman, who had read some of my work and thought that my voice was strong and that I had a story to tell. And so Gurney Norman is a Kentucky writer from Hazard, a community called Allays here. And I felt like, well, if Gurney Norman thinks I can write, then maybe I go do this.
Yeah.
Maybe I give it a shot. I definitely didn't have the confidence. I had not intended for that for anybody to see that, for anybody to read that. But so anyway, I go to Heinemann, go to the Writers Workshop, immediately feel like that I have found a community that I needed, but that was an unexpected place to find it, I think, for me. Yeah. And the Appalachian writing community is so welcoming to anyone new who comes in. It's not competitive. And so I was just welcomed with open arms by everybody involved. And after I left, I had looked at some spaces on Main Street. I'd been home a few years with my son, and he had started school, and I was kind of like, what's my next move here? Where am I going? What am I doing? And so Hazard had invested in their downtown. They'd hired a downtown coordinator. They were looking to revitalize downtown, which up until that point, like all small towns across America, Walmart had moved out of Main Street, kind of taking everything with it. Yeah. And it was a lot of attorneys and the courthouse and and it was very transactional if you came to Main Street. So I knew that there was this push from local government to revitalize Main Street. So from that, and my experience with the Appalachian writing community and my love of literature, and I'm dabbling in some writing, I felt like a bookstore seemed to be the most logical place to start. And I feel like every town that I vacation in or visit, I always look for the indie bookstore because I feel like that's kind of like the hub of what's going on, and you can get a real pulse of a community through independent bookstores.
Yeah.
And there were all these just beautifully talented writers that were coming out of Eastern Kentucky, Central Appalachia in general, and particularly ones here that I didn't feel like had a home bookstore. And I feel like it's important as a writer to have somebody that, champions your work and hand sells your books and a place you can go to have book releases and that sort of thing. And we just didn't have that here. So I started on Main Street, found a spot on Main Street that was tiny, like 250 square feet.
That's mind-boggling. I mean, it's so small, but I love it.
Well, our downtown coordinator likened it to, it was like a food truck before my restaurant. That was kind of the way she put it. So it was low overhead. It didn't feel like a huge risk financially, that if I did it and it didn't work, it wasn't a huge loss. So I came back from Heinemann that summer and just started working all that fall, like figuring things out. Like I visited a few independent bookstores, just kind of get a read on how they ran their business. Also knowing that running one in Hazard was not going to be like anywhere else.
No.
Like there was no model for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, which is like kind of good because you get to shape it not in the image of another place. Right, benchmarking, I think people do that maybe too much.
Yeah.
And they try to make something a version that it can't be because they see something else. So that's kind of interesting that you had to just shape it in the image of where you're from.
Yeah, I really did, because there were traditionally, I didn't know, historically I didn't know of any independent bookstores in Hazard. So I basically just had to come up with what I wanted it to be. And so I started in that space in January of 2020. 7 days after I opened, the store flooded. There was 2 feet of water in the store. And so we managed to get everything up off the lower shelves. I didn't lose any inventory. So I was closed for a week or so while they cleaned that up. And then COVID hit in March, and I had to shut the doors on March the 13th of 2020 because our governor, had a mandate for no in-store shopping. But I went into the store like 3 days a week. People were really supportive and nervous that this was going to be the end. Like they were so excited. My opening day in January was huge. The store was packed, just a constant stream of people, and everybody was excited about having a bookstore. And then when COVID hits, they're like, oh, this is it. She won't be able to make it through this. And so again, this community is a real testament to the success of this. I feel like I owe just as much to the community as any work that I've done to make this happen. So I start selling books out of the front door. Like people literally just drive up to the front door like a drive-through bookstore. I started delivering in town. Anybody that lived within the Hazard city limits, I would go drop books off at their front door. Anything I could just to make enough money to pay the bills to keep it going. And so by November of 2020, it had outgrown that space, less than a year. And I moved into what used to be the Welcome Center for the city of Hazard.
I love that.
And so I've been here since November of 2020.
I mean, it is amazing to me how close, the margin is between something surviving and thriving. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been like that if it were in a bigger town. But do you feel like because it was the only one and people were clamoring for it, that made people be like, no, we have to do this? I just feel like sometimes if there's more options, people are more apathetic. Like, oh, if that one closes,
we
whatever.
Still got this. Yeah. So the closest bookstore to here it's 2 hours. I think you'll either have to go to Lexington or Moorhead, or probably the closest two. Yeah, it is. And, aside from whatever Walmart's selling. But I knew that there were readers here, me being one of them, that wasn't reading what you could find at Walmart. You know, when you
True.
look at this whole local and regional interest section, you're not going to find any of that
Nope.
in Walmart. And I think particularly, and this may be for everywhere, but my experience is Appalachia. And I think, we take comfort in seeing ourselves represented in a story. And so I think, the national publishing world has left Appalachia out a lot, or it's very pigeonholed in what they're willing to publish.
Yeah, people want to see their own lives reflected in a story, and not in a way that is stereotyped to the max. And I think I've just really loved having these conversations with people across Appalachia that are saying, like, you know what? No one else is going to write these stories, so we have to do it. And the bookstore gets to share those. And so I think I read an article where you mentioned, I think it was the article you wrote on my birthday about the prison that they're proposing in Letcher County, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But
that's a whole separate podcast.
It was a real, I mean, I didn't know that. Yeah. And 3 within 100 miles of your house?
Yeah.
Federal prisons? That's crazy. But I think it was in that article you mentioned Australians came here.
Yes.
And they had hiked around, but they wanted to know about the place that they'd read about in books and get more acquainted with wildlife. And that's why a bookstore is necessary. Because they're going to come from all over the world to this little shop, and you get a chance to show them the real Appalachia that you know.
That's one of the more mind-boggling things that's happened since owning the bookstore is the people who come and I, oh, this is horrible to say, but I can usually tell when they come in the bookstore if they're from the area.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know why. It's just, I can tell. And so, and they'll come and I'm like, well, what brings you to Hazard? That's always my question. What brings you to Hazard? And sometimes there are people who just came for the bookstore, like the ladies from Australia. They were staying in Red River Gorge geological area, which is probably, I don't know, an hour's drive from here.
It's beautiful.
And they came just for the bookstore. And so, they asked me, they had read the book Woman of Troublesome Creek. Oh. And that's what centered them to, Eastern Kentucky and exploring Eastern Kentucky.
Wow.
And they were like, well, do you have any recommendations? And they had lots of questions, about the region. And they were fascinated because they had hiked our trails. And I think they saw like a ground squirrel. And we're so excited about a ground squirrel and a garter snake. And they were just thrilled.
They're like, what are these?
Right, yeah. And so that was funny. And so then we kind of we compared our regions and the wildlife. And I just thought it was funny that they were so fascinated by ground squirrel. But it really gave me an opportunity to get on my soapbox, which I did, because I feel a need to defend this area all the time.
Yeah.
And I wish it weren't like that, but that's just what it is. But I feel this need to want to defend and at least give another perspective and some balance to be like, yeah, those are our challenges. Those things are real. This, the stereotypes didn't just come from nowhere. You know, it's real. Yeah. But also, there's a balance to that. And this is also what's happening in Appalachia, which doesn't get a whole lot of media attention, I feel like.
Yeah, the counter-narrative, Mississippi, Appalachia, rural Midwest, anywhere I go and talk to people, it's this constant battle against the stories that are more widely circulated that, don't do this place justice. And I love, there are very few places I love as much as Eastern Kentucky. And I can't tell you exactly why, but part of it is the stories I've read and the way that has shaped my view of it.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that I didn't get the negative stereotypes quite as much, or maybe just didn't listen to them. They were intercepted, And so I have this really, really great affection because of the novelist and the memoirs that I've read. And so I think that's an important thing. And you get to give that to people so that when they leave, now imagine people talking about Appalachia in Australia.
Yeah.
And then you can have other defenders, be like, wait, actually, I've been there. I've read these stories too. Like, hey, this is a great place.
And that's what I hope. And I'm really cognizant of that when somebody comes in and if they have only come to visit the bookstore, I'm thinking I may be the sole representation that they have for this region, and that's frightening.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
But
it's cool.
Yeah, it is. And at some point after a little while, and going back to like the stores opening and COVID and the flood, people ask me a lot about how that affected the business. And I'm going to be honest, COVID wasn't horrible for the book business. I'll say that. I think it definitely played a part in the success of this bookstore.
Yeah.
Because people were home, they were reading again. They were working puzzles. I sold tons of puzzles. I mean, and this, I think I have to acknowledge that I think people slowed down during COVID and got back to a lot of the things that an independent bookstore offers.
Yeah.
And then I got press that was away from here. There were lots of journalists that reached out and just wanted to hear about the bookstore.
Your story is very unique. It's very intense. Within a month, I mean, welcome to the book business.
Right.
And so, yes, there's this success that it's had, but it was, I think, you have more publicity out on the internet than most indie bookstores. Truly. I mean, when I do research about certain ones, because there wasn't this sort of intersection of problems with an opening. So, because obviously flooding is a huge issue in Appalachia. And then you got COVID, and then you have a bookstore. And so I feel like that was really like attractive. But I think people root for places like this when there's a threat to lose it. And it's kind of unfortunate how we sometimes only support things when we get to that point. But for you, it wasn't like you'd been around. So It was like, no, we don't want this to go away. We want it to start, really. So it's kind of it was an interesting intersection of all these things, but I just found it so awesome. And I mean, you had to have been exhausted and like scared a little bit.
Absolutely.
And to have the backing of the community, really people that from Eastern Kentucky that lived elsewhere, you said were buying so many books.
Oh, yeah. So I was shipping books everywhere. Yeah. Like anybody who had any tie to Hazard, people that are from Hazard that, like LA, Texas, Georgia, Florida, like that, and these were all people who had ties to Hazard and were just so grateful that this is what I was doing. That, I got lots of stories of, I grew up in Hazard. I only wish there would have been a bookstore when I was growing up. And we want to support you, however, whatever that looks like. And just that same story over and over again.
And I think in the context of a town like Hazard, a lot of these places are searching for a new identity.
Yeah.
And this gives it soul. I mean, that's the beauty of this.
Well, and when we started thinking about downtown and like what we wanted to do, because it's very much a group effort. We have a small business association and all the small business owners, we all are very in tune to what the other is doing, and there's no competition. And we all realize the role that we play in this revitalization. But we started thinking about things that we go out of town for. What do we go out of town for? And is that something that we can bring here? Yeah. That one will keep us here, keep our dollars here, but also bring other people in from around the region. And one of those things, is the arts. I find myself most of the time, if I'm out of town, it's for a literary event, a concert, theater, that kind of thing. And I think that holds true for a lot of people here. And so we have found ways. We're in the infancy of that, I'll say that, to try to make that happen here. Yeah. And I wanted readers here to be able to connect to the writers that they loved.
Yeah. And to bring them physically to the store. I mean, you have some heavy hitters that have come here. Yeah. And to have that relationship with writers that's so personal, some rural bookstores don't get that. Yeah. With the Crystal Wilkinsons and Silas Houses of the world.
It's beneficial.
I mean...
And they're my friends. Yeah. Truly at the end of the day, they're my friends. And, that those relationships far surpass the work that they do. But I also feel a personal stake every time I recommend one of their books. Like it feels, it's authentic. I know this person. I know the work that went into this. Yeah. This is the book you need to read if you want whatever XYZ about Appalachia.
I think that makes it so much easier to sell a book. Yeah. Like first of all, you didn't just Wikipedia the thing, No. Sometimes you're not going to know every book. Again, you haven't read everything. And again, bookstore owners have not read
Yeah.
tens of thousands of books. You don't have time. But for the ones that you do know these people, you know the heart behind it. So it's so much easier to sell that type of story when you know what went into it, even more than just the thing itself.
Well, and I think that authenticity comes through when you are hand selling a book.
When people want to buy a book that a bookseller is very excited about.
Yes.
And there is an obvious recognition.
Yeah.
Because I feel it too. I mean, when I saw a James McBride book, sometimes I wonder, it's like, do these people think that I'm, out of my mind? Because I get so excited. I'm like, maybe I'm overwhelming them a little bit. But that's how it is for you and Appalachian writers, and you know them. Yeah. And I just think that, talk about how that has helped you persevere through the beginning stages and still remain excited, having those writers as your friends that support you.
Well, and I think that's the key word there, that's the great thing, is I think they're just as supportive of me as I am of them. Like, it's, that relationship is very important, and it's important to me as the bookseller. It's important to them as a writer. Like, we both are benefiting from this relationship, but like I said, also it goes deeper than that, because they know me and I know them, and it's but it helps. I'm not going to say it doesn't, to be able to just shoot a message to Silas House or Krista Wilkinson and be like, hey, you want to come to Hazard?
Yeah, not a bad number in the phone.
Right.
No,
it really is. It is a special group. And I think the literary history of the region, this is not new, even before the more contemporary writers like Silas House or Krista Wilkinson or Bernard. I mean, you had James Steele and Gurney Norman, and these were all people who, I mean, I look at the amount of the writers, and I had no idea until I really got into a writer's circle in the Appalachian Writers Workshop, how many lives Gurney Norman had influenced. Because when I was like, oh yeah, Gurney had read some of my work and felt like I needed to be here. And then it was just like, I could just go around the room and people would be like, yeah, I took his class at UK. That's why I'm here. Yeah, he did this for me, and it was just like, people would just start chiming in about the impact that Gurney Norman had. And just quietly under the radar, he's just in people's ear. That your voice is strong, your work's important, go do this.
Those people are so important because it is all on the low. Like, unless you were with that group of writers, like, how would you know how many lives someone like Gurney Norman has influenced? But the thing I think that goes to the character of this region is it is much more about what you do than seeming like something. It's more who you are than what you look like.
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything publicly necessarily to get someone to believe in themselves. It has to be personal. Right. And so to think of, all those quiet moments where someone's whole life just changed because of someone like Gurney, that to me is just amazing to think about.
Yeah. And he, and that was, I mean, I think a lot of this journey, my journey as a writer, my journey as a bookstore owner, like, a lot of that goes back to him.
Can you talk about the first moment because you were really nervous to share what you had written with Gurney, but how did you meet him the first time, and why did he even ask for what you were writing?
So I had gone to it was a poetry slam at Hazard Community College. And it's funny because this memory just came up on my Facebook this week. Wow. This is the anniversary of when we had met. And they do a yearly poetry slam in April for National Poetry Month at the community college. And they were honoring Jim Webb, who was a really talented poet in Whitesburg. And so Gurney had come down to read some of Jim's work. People, other poets were taking turns reading Jim's work at this poetry slam. And I had been a huge fan of his since reading Divine Rights Trip, Kinfolk's Ancient Creek. Really, his whole collection is amazing. So anyway, I was, it was a fangirl moment for me to go see Gurney
Yeah.
And after the event, I went up, had him sign my book, just made chit chat the best I could. It was very awkward and horrible, but so the best I could chat with him. And then he asked me where I was from, and I told him I was from Red Fox, and he asked me about Car Creek basketball.
Oh, yeah, that's a big deal.
Which is a big deal here. It's, there are lots of legendary stories about Car Creek basketball. And my grandpa had played for Car Creek, and so we started talking, and I started getting into the weeds of some of that, and he was like, have you written any of this? Is this written anywhere? And I'm like, well, I haven't written about that, and my grandpa had passed away at that point, and now I really regret not, really getting good interviews with him about those days playing.
Yeah.
But I did. I told Gurney, I was like, well, I have other stuff. I am working on some stuff. I don't even know that I realized I wanted it to be a book. I mean, I felt like maybe it could go beyond, just being for me. But it almost felt like a journal at that point. So I wasn't sure that it was ready, especially not for Gurney Norman to read. So
yeah, this isn't just like some random person that's going to read it first.
So I'm like, oh, well, why not? That ignorance at that point was great. I wish I had that now. I'm way too aware now of writing and the whole.
Yeah.
But that ignorance was bliss in that moment. So I emailed it to him that night. I go straight home from the poetry reading, get some pages together, and send it to him. And this was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. By midnight, he had emailed me back. He had read what I'd sent him and had highlighted places where he was like, this voice is so strong. This is beautiful. I've never heard this described in this manner. We've got to get you to the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And the cutoff for applications is May the 1st to be able to go to Hyman for the summer. So yeah, I submitted, and it was late, and Brent Hutchinson, who was the director at that time, was like, you've turned this in late, but we're going to put you on a wait list. If somebody decides they can't come, we'll get you in. And I ended up being accepted and got to go that summer.
God, that gives me chills.
And none of that would have happened without Gurney Norman, or had I decided not to go to that poetry reading that night.
That's such an important thing. Talking about like being almost too aware now of the best things that happen in life are just a series of really small choices. Did you go to that poetry reading? Did you say yes to giving someone your work, even if you were scared?
Yeah.
And how much, think of that was 5 years ago?
Yeah.
The 5-year story from that moment. Being like, yep, I'm going to go to this. Yep, I'm going to go get an autograph.
Yeah.
Have some chit chat about basketball. Talk about stories from my family. None of that was extraordinary.
No.
But it was putting yourself in a position to have these things happen to you, and like, look what the world gave you.
I know, it's insane to think about, and I try not to very much, but it changed the way I moved through the world. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Because now I am acutely aware of the small moment, and I will say, okay, this has presented itself. I should probably do it.
Yeah.
Whereas before, because I have watched things unfold with this business, and just very seamlessly, very effortlessly, I just show up and do the work, and things happen.
It's one of the more special things that I've read about, and that you were willing to journal. I've learned of so many memoirs that came from, I don't want to forget.
Yeah, for me it was a grief process. And, I don't know how much you know of that story or the reasons why I'm writing the memoir. But I'm in recovery. I was in active addiction for, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years. Yesterday was actually my clean date. I have 19 years clean as of yesterday. And through that process, I had a first cousin who was murdered. And he was still in active addiction, and I had gotten clean, and we had grown up more like siblings than cousins. And so it was a grief process for me. And it was that exact thing of like, I don't want to forget this. And so a memory would come up, and I may be standing in the line at the grocery store, and I get my phone out and be like, if I don't write this down, I'm going to forget it. Like, what if I forget this just silly thing that we did together? And so that just became a whole collection of moments. And then I started writing about some of the situations that I was in while I was using, which were not pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a way to also process that information. And so that's basically what the memoir is. It's about that relationship and that family dynamic, and also what addiction looked like here during that time. And it was, mid to late 90s, Oxycontin, opioid epidemic, beginnings, the whole thing. So I think it's important because a lot of people went through it, and I don't have that memoir that I haven't read it. It may be out there. I haven't read it. That shares that time from the addict's point of view. We have beautiful journalist work that has, that covers that. Dope Sick in particular by Beth Macy, I think is excellent.
That's so good.
But that's from a journalist perspective, and I don't know that the work is out there from an addict's perspective.
I appreciate you sharing that. And part of me was wondering, as I was coming here, I was like, oh, if that's part of what you're writing about, because it's strange to think that as we were talking about memoir and novels reflecting your own story, that you're going to be that for somebody from an era that doesn't have the personal point of view. That's pretty wild to think about. That's really powerful, because the ways that these books have shaped you, your story now is going to be really important for somebody who either went through something similar or might not understand that experience. And someone might read that and have a better understanding of what people like you went through and what it was like at that time.
And I think that's exactly more so than somebody who's in recovery. I mean, I hope that happens also. Mm-hmm. Or somebody who's still in active addiction that finds it and then finds some hope in knowing that, it's possible to get clean.
Yeah.
But I think more importantly to me, it was people who maybe don't know about that experience. And then there hopefully will be some empathy for people who end up in active addiction, with substance use disorder. And that, it never comes down to just a one moment where you choose to do it. Like, it's not that simple. No. And I wish it were. And people think that. They'll be like, well, if you hadn't picked up, if you hadn't done that first pill, this wouldn't have never happened. And I'm like, well, I wish it were that simple. But, I think you need to understand the whole, you got to see the whole story.
Yeah.
What kind of homes did these people grow up in? What was your exposure to drugs? And then also, after I read Dope Sick, that's when I became aware of the role that Big Pharma played in all of this. Because when I was out getting high, at 17, 18 years old, I didn't know that the Sackler family had targeted Appalachia. And there was a reason why these pills were showing up at every party I was at. I didn't know that side of the story until I read Dope Sick. And then at that point, I was almost able to give myself a break and be like, okay, well, essentially, kids in this area were victims of that. And that it changed the way I felt about that whole situation.
That's a really important thing because, talking about the whole story, or that people like to simplify choice.
Yeah.
And ignore the rest of someone's history. That's what it's about. You have to understand the context that's happening.
Right.
But unless you also see it from your point of view, there's something missing from that story too. And so I think that's really powerful. And I'm glad you're writing it. I'll read it.
Thank you. Well, there's one
sure.
sale.
Yeah.
I've sold one book.
Anything you ever, at this point, really, I like you enough already that I will buy anything you ever write.
I'm holding you accountable for that. One book sale automatically.
That's an amazing journey to becoming a writer. But I suppose we should get to the books that you put on my bed from your perspective as a reader. So which one do you want to start with here?
Well, let me say that this was it's a tough decision. It's hard. And I get asked a lot, what's your favorite book? I don't have one.
Yeah.
That's impossible for me. I'm a huge music buff, and I get the same question about music. Who's your favorite artist? What's your favorite album? Can't do that either. Because I really just think it's where I'm at,
Yeah.
that it kind of dictates what I read and what I listen to and what I watch. And so anything that I consume really depends on where I'm at. So,
Yeah, there's stages
yeah,
of
yeah.
consumption. Like
So I will say, the 6 books that I picked, I tried to stay within Appalachia.
Okay.
Because there were other books like To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think is on my list, and I loved The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Oh, yeah.
When I read it, so there are books that are outside of Appalachia that I could have pulled from, but I wanted to kind of stick with regionally what I love and what had been influential, because that's what I want to sell here, and these are the people I surround myself with. These are the stories that make me comfortable. These are the books I'm proud of. I'm proud of these people. And so
heck yeah.
I stuck with an Appalachian theme.
Well,
so I wanted to preface with that.
We talked about that on the phone, and I think that's important because similar with, the backstory with Curtis, 4 of those were about Tuskegee.
Yeah.
Because I think me being a white person who lived in Minnesota at that time, he knew I was really interested in history. So he was sharing something that was really important to him that was very local. And now I know way more than I ever thought I would about Tuskegee, Alabama and the Institute, And then, that Alice Walker book, I think, played a lot to his childhood. Like, I think I understood Curtis a little better in rural Alabama back in the, 50s, 60s because of that story.
Yeah.
And that's a deep cut book that I think more people need to read. So it makes sense that you would choose these Appalachian stories, and I'm excited to hear about them.
Sure. So I guess my first introduction to Appalachian literature, and it's hard to remember, but I think it's probably Jessie Stewart. I'm confident that this is probably the first Appalachian literature that was put in my hand. And so this book was given to me, I want to think I was probably 5th grade. Our governor at the time, Martha Wilkinson, had partnered with the James Stewart Foundation and gave these books to schools all across Kentucky. And there was a whole series. This is just The Beatenest Boy. This is the one that I brought today. But there were a whole collection, pennies worth of character. Like, there were all kinds of Jessie Stewart books that they had published. And this found its way to Car Creek Elementary, and I got my hands on it. And
Amazing.
And this is the actual copy. It has a couple of names written in it that I don't recognize at all, so that's strange. But this is the copy that I've had my whole life. And so it's about a young boy who's orphaned. His parents are killed, and he goes to live with his grandma, and it's just him and his grandma, and it's kind of just their everyday life of survival in a rural area. It doesn't specifically say Kentucky, but Jessie Stewart was from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so it's just their everyday life and the story of him growing up and the importance of that relationship and the things that his grandma taught him. And I think I connected to it as a kid. There's a section where it's getting close to Christmas and he wants to buy his grandma something for Christmas. Yeah. And so he's trying to figure out a way to get money. And so he finds this coon dog in the woods and revives it, and it becomes his hunting dog. And so he decides that he's going to go look for raccoons and possums, sell their hides, get money to buy his grandma a gift.
Wow.
So he goes out, they hunt possums all night, him and his dog Orphan. He names it Orphan because he finds it in the woods. So they find 3 possums. He brings them back, and he's not using a gun. The dog's treeing them, and he's catching them. And so he has to come back, and then he has to kill the possum and then take its hide to go sell. And when he looks in the bag, he can't do it. He can't kill the possums. Yeah. And so, for whatever reason, even today, like I just connected with that for whatever reason. Like, he's like, I can't do this. My grandma wouldn't want me to harm these animals just to get money to buy her a Christmas gift. So he ends up not doing that. And I think that's like a pivotal moment in that book where he is faced with that decision of like, we don't need the meat. We're not going to eat the meat, and I'm just going to kill these animals for their coat, and so he ends up not doing that. But
so it's interesting. I don't know why this reminded me of, I think you told a story once about you used to collect, like you bring animals and keep them in your house.
Red Spotted Newts,
right?
The Eastern Newt, yeah.
And and was it your grandfather that said,
it was,
don't do this?
Yes.
And didn't he trick you?
I've never made that connection till you just said that. I'm like, I don't know why this book, but
there's a lesson in there.
And I think I did recognize the connection only as an adult looking back and reading this of the role that my grandpa played, because I was in a single parent home and he was really pivotal in a lot of things that I learned to do. Very adamant that I should learn to do everything. That there were no man jobs or woman jobs. Like you got to learn to mow grass. You got to learn to clean out these gutters. Like he had me on a ladder cleaning out gutters. So, I mean, it was just life lessons. And I think that's a whole lot of what this is. But yeah, I absolutely loved catching anything that just frogs, turtles, Eastern newts were my favorite.
Like it's so interesting. I drove through Red Fox, and so to think about you doing that and getting so excited about these but to the
animals. Point he tricked me.
Yeah, can you talk about what he did to make you stop keeping them?
And I get this a lot because people want to know where the store name came from.
Yeah, we got to make that connection.
So that's where it came from. I had an aquarium on the porch that I would keep things in. And I loved Eastern newts. I think they're beautiful. Still do. Still love them. They all have personalities to me, which is funny.
Did you name them?
I don't know that I don't know I kept them long enough to name them. But I had one, and there's another newt, or it's a salamander actually that is larger. It's orange, but it has black spots, and I couldn't even tell you the common name right now. But it's quite a bit larger than the Eastern newt.
Okay.
And so he told me if I kept them in captivity that they would just keep doubling in size. Like I couldn't do this, where we'd have these giant newts running around.
Yeah.
That I had to let it go, and so I kept that one that night, and he switched them out. So the next day I get up and the salamander that's in there is like 3 times the size of an Eastern newt. And he's like, I told you if you do this, this is what happens. And so I'm terrified because I'm like 8 years old and I'm believing every word he says.
Right. You're like, of course you trust this person.
Right. And so I'm like, okay, well, I can never do this again. And so that ended any kind of caging any animal at that point. But so when I opened the store, I really focused on branding because I think branding's important, and this is kind of going off topic, but I wanted people to be able to see my logo and know immediately what it was, that it was synonymous with, oh, that's the bookstore in Hazard.
Yeah, and it as an outsider, first time I came here, first time I saw that logo, I was like, I'm not going to forget what that is. It's a great branding.
And so and it was kind of a nod to my grandpa because he was so influential and like the original storyteller in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, 100%. The original. He loved to talk and tell stories. And so I think that was kind of my my nod to him. And oddly enough, what's ended up happening is now anytime somebody sees a red spotted newt out in the wild, I get a picture.
Of course.
Which I love.
Yeah.
And it's, and then I think, well, that branding worked. Now
you're synonymous.
Right. It worked.
That's really great. And I mean, I love that story so much with your grandpa. Like, what a trick. What a great way to scare the hell out of an 8-year-old.
Yeah, it worked.
But, it's those ways that your grandparents or really any elder in your life kind of they become you think about how they would act or behave, and it's sort of a guide.
A whole lot of, in any kind of I don't know, activist work, for no better term, that I'm involved in now, I think all have their origins from my grandpa, because I did not realize he was very much an environmentalist when that wasn't popular in this area. And I didn't realize that. Like, I didn't realize till I got older and went to school and talked to other people. Like, he was an environmentalist when it wasn't popular to be one here.
Yeah, that can.
And I didn't realize it. So he instilled a whole lot of that stuff, just subtly. You know, he wasn't overbearing with it. He wasn't out protesting or carrying signs or anything, but he had his own subtle way that he did that.
Just like Ernie, you know?
Yeah.
Helping people become writers. Grandpa's out here helping people care about the natural world. I think you even said once that growing up here just made naturalists out of all of you.
Yeah.
Like, in some way, you can't
not care about it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you live this close to nature, and and you can see, and we have seen, the effects of what happens when you damage those surroundings, and how that can impact your life. I think you can't help but grow up.
Yeah, and then, you know, even tying it into the store, it's like you can share stories that help people realize what the environmental history of this place is.
Yeah.
And in a way that's approachable, because sometimes that can be, again, people are ignorant about coal, for one, just in general. But even further than that, you know, I think my biggest thing that I've learned living in Franklin is the most important watershed is in your backyard. And so I think that going to a local place and learning from someone who intimately understands the importance of preserving their own nature can help you go back to yours and care. So I think that's a unique thing about this region too, is there are a lot of people that are passionate about, you know, saving this beautiful place.
Absolutely.
And hopefully that inspires people to go and consider, even in a different landscape, what that might mean for them. That's really cool. Oh my God, I love that. And it's look how old this is.
I know, it's...
The spots. Look at that picture.
Yeah.
This is a great cover too. Oh, thanks for sharing that.
It is. It is a really beautiful book.
So what about the next one?
So I think the next one probably, I'm going to try to go in chronological order, I think, when they made appearances. So this is Catherine Marshall's Christie. And there was a CBS miniseries about this book. I don't know if you ever saw that.
No.
Fabulous. It's so good.
I'll watch it.
And I don't know, you'll have to let me know where you can track it down, because I don't know that it's streaming anywhere. I don't know that it's on I haven't been able to find it on any streaming platforms.
I believe my brother, he's a cinephile. He still sends me DVDs. He's the only reason
I have the DVDs. So
I
can send them to you.
Yeah, you could. I would love to watch it.
So this is East Tennessee. That's about a teacher that goes into a community. She's 19 years old, and she goes into the Smokies to teach in a community. And it's, you know, just all the things that were issues. This is, if I remember, so it's like 1912, so early 1900s.
Okay, yeah.
Appalachia. And just the, you know, I mean, the poverty is addressed here, the superstitions, you know, all the things that were really prevalent. The food writing is good, you know, and so but I think more importantly for me, it's like the family connections in the community, and those are the things that I related to, because obviously I wasn't 19, had never been a teacher, had not lived, in the early 1900s Appalachia. I think I was 12 when I read this, you know. So, but there were things that I connected to even at that age, and this would have been like, I don't know, like 1991 or something. And,
wow.
And so I really connected with the community and the people and the pride in who they were and where they were from. Yeah. And I think so. Like with this book, The Beatenest Boy, there was language in there. I had not seen people write in our dialect, and so that's what I found in that, but also related to that story as his relationship with his grandparent. As far as Christie was concerned, this was the first time I had seen anybody write about Appalachia. Like, I just hadn't had about the place.
Yeah.
You know, I hadn't read and there are beautiful descriptions of place in here, and that I hadn't read that. And so, and then the TV series came out, and that was really cool. But
so then it gets to bring that to life.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes talk down on adaptations, because like, yeah, you can do a poor job of it.
Yeah.
But I think what's cool is then you get to see the images that you've seen in your head and connected with, from the story. And that's really, and I think pride here is, I just don't care about Dayton, Ohio, where I grew up. I left and I just have not thought about it since I left. I stopped, literally, I've told this before, I stopped to get pizza. Yeah. Two of my favorite pizza places are in Dayton. That's it. I just don't care. And so in some ways, I almost like felt self-conscious when I moved to Appalachia. I was like, oh man, are people going to think there's something wrong with me for not having that epigenetic love and connection to the land? But no, people, I just love that people share that. And there are so many stories, I think, of that first book that made you realize, like I'm from here. Like this is, we're like, I love this community. I love these people, problems and all. But I'm curious though, speaking of like the teacher angle, are there any teachers from your background when you were a kid that are particularly special that you remember?
Man, I probably have a couple. And also I come from a whole family of teachers, like a whole line of teachers. My great uncles and great grandpa were some of the first educated people that came out of Red Fox. They were some of the first to get degrees, and my great grandpa would go to the mouth of the holler on Sunday mornings to the store, the country store that was there, and he would read the Sunday paper to everybody. And so
that's amazing.
My mom was a teacher. I have two aunts that were both teachers, first cousins that are teachers. Like there was a long line.
So then you're just shaped by teachers. Wow. We used to go into the holler and read the paper to people.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And they both taught at Car Creek High School.
What did they teach?
Everything, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
You got to be a generalist.
Yeah. I'm going to bet they taught everything at that point.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. And just thinking too of like, even old stories in Appalachia, they just remain. They're forever. People will connect to these types of stories. Yeah. I just don't think it'll matter even if it's 3,100. There's something that's really just true about these. So that's pretty cool. This is a very dramatic cover.
Yeah, well, it's a very dramatic show. Also, like
I have to watch it.
I'll have to give you a warning that it's pretty heavy.
That's cool. I can't wait.
It was hard living then in Appalachia, so lots of heaviness.
Cool. So what's next?
And I think probably on the other end of that spectrum is Silas House's Clay's Quilt.
So good.
And this is one I would like. I need to go back and read. This is not my original copy. So this book came out, I want to think it's 2000, 2001. 2001. So I was living in Western Kentucky when this came out with my aunt because I was running amok here, just high and and doing some damage. So my mom had sent me out to live with my aunt in Western Kentucky, and as a geographical cure, which that does not work, by the way. So, FYI,
if you're ever going to try it.
It doesn't matter where you are, it'll find you. So this book came out, and I can remember there was an insert in the paper, and I don't remember what the name. It was the little magazines that were in the Sunday papers, probably Lexington Herald Leader, but they had done a profile on Silas House. And it was like, rural mail carrier releases debut novel, Clay's Quilt, and he's from Laurel County.
Yeah.
And so me and my aunt both, we were like, oh man, here's this Eastern Kentucky mailman who's written a book. And so she was in a book club at the time, and so I'm like 20.
Yeah.
Trying not to get high, but it was not pretty. But anyway, she has this book club, and so we both go to Barnes & Noble and get a copy. Barnes & Noble in Bowling Green. We get a copy and read it, and she uses it for her book club. And for me, this was probably the first time that I saw what I would consider contemporary Appalachia. Because most of what I had read was like late 1800s, early 1900s. Everybody's in cabins, and which, is fine and it's true. But, but I had never, I don't think I had read anything that was contemporary Appalachia until Clay's Quilt. And so unfortunately, this is a first edition, but I don't have the original one that I bought.
That's okay. I don't think I've seen that cover of it.
Because life took some turns since then. But
this is a really, really good book.
It is so good. It is so good.
And I think even as an out of region person, I can understand what you're saying with like that it paints a good picture of contemporary Appalachia. Yeah. And I enjoyed it because I read a lot of old dead authors.
Right.
I love old stories. Right. So this brought me into a different version of some of the other stories I've read that's more contemporary too. And Silas, just an amazing. writer.
I don't even know what to say past that. He just is so good, and I just feel like a lot of our life experiences have been the same. So he's pulling from the same well, of information. I feel like when I read his books is that I'm like, I know that person. I know that character.
So you read this when you were over in Bowling Green?
Yeah.
How did it feel reading it away from home in a different part of the state? What feelings did it bring up that you resonated with?
Well, and it did bring up feelings. One, because I was homesick. Anytime that I've not lived, and that's been, I've never lived outside of the state of Kentucky, and I've only moved away a couple times to go to college in different parts of the state. But, I've always wanted to be back home. Yeah. At that age, I probably, especially, when I was graduating high school, I wanted to get out of here. Everybody wants to get out of wherever they are at that age.
Yeah.
But I had been through a lot of different things by the time I found myself in Bowling Green, and I was probably homesick to some degree. Also, I can remember my aunt using it as a way to explain to people where she was from. Because she had moved out there. My uncle was from, Western Kentucky, and it's a different culture. I mean, it's the same state, but very different culture.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about where she had come from, and she felt that constant need to defend Eastern Kentucky living outside of the region. And so I felt like after we read Clay's Quilt, I could see her almost have a sense of pride going into that book club and being like, this is really this explains it much better than anything else you've read, Isn't
that amazing how just one book can make you step into a space more confidently? Yeah. Because it does, it tells a story that you would tell, essentially. You know what I mean? It's like you don't have to grapple with the stereotypes as much. It's like, no, I feel good about this and what it means to me. That's an interesting thing of, what if people just, and that's part of why I'm doing this is what book could someone read to understand a place better?
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me has made me realize I value so many places that people from my background don't go because of a book I read. And that entry point into a place and understanding of people is just something that I wish more people had.
Yeah.
Like so many folks from, I'm not talking down on them. It's just dumb luck. A lot of it that I got exposed to certain books and then just even history. My relationships in Mississippi technically started in 2010 at the University of Michigan because I started reading more about Mississippi and getting really curious about, well, one, all these writers that are amazing from there.
Right.
But also just the significance of the state and what it represents for the United States. Yeah. And so reading all the way in Michigan, it was years before I'd go back there, but it was no surprise that I made all these friends in Mississippi because I was yearning for it, and I just felt like I wanted to understand it better in person. And so, to give someone that and to show them like, hey, this is what life is like out there. And Bowling Green, it is. So my friend Elin Justice, who's from Pikeville, when I interviewed her for my other podcast, she said the same thing when she went out there for college. That you're in a literature class and you're like the resident Appalachian
Yeah.
that has to
Yeah.
speak for this,
Yeah.
whole place. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's not really how this goes. But there's a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of pressure to get rid of your accent. Elaine McMillan Sheldon did the same thing.
Yeah,
Went to
100%.
WVU, meets people from out of the region, starts talking different.
Yeah.
Because you have to deaden that accent to seem more
And that's
like everybody
and
else.
It's so frustrating. I mean, that's probably the most frustrating part to me. And it gets pointed out. I mean, that's what the part that I think is funny. And I don't know if this happens to people from other regions because I haven't seen it. But it seems like it's okay to point ours out. Where in other places, I don't know that happens. Like people
Definitely not
would
as
be
much.
like, "Oh, I can tell you're from Boston." Or whatever. I don't know if that happens. But I just recently came back from a work conference and we were doing like a cocktail drinks hour or whatever. And it was really a time to network. That was the whole point, was networking. So I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to do this, And I meet a group from Pennsylvania, and the very first thing they say is, "Oh, you must be from Kentucky. Where are you? Where are you from? You must be from." I mean, it was the very first thing.
And just talk about like not understanding how to win friends.
Right.
Like, how dumb do you have to be?
Immediately I was like, no.
You're going to turn people off. And what's funny about that, too, is I grew up in Dayton, and my brother lived in Cincinnati for 6 years. Southwest Ohio has tons of Kentucky accent.
Yeah.
So it's not, but again, to lead with that.
But why would you lead with that? That's what I'm also, where this is a work conference, so it's clear that we have lots of things we can talk about other than that. Like, we're all here for the same thing. Let's not lead with my accent.
It's like, alienating someone right off the
immediately.
bat.
And so then immediately I'm self-conscious, and but that's a real struggle, and I hate that happens. And I hate that people feel like they have to abandon that when they move to other parts of the country.
Because that really is a fucked up way that kids from Appalachia naturally respond to going to a university or moving out of the region. And I don't think until I met more people that all told a similar story of how they tried to be different so that they felt better about themselves, what that does to self-esteem is just like shame on everyone that makes kids feel that way. And it's funny, someone stayed at my house last night for Airbnb. I rent out a room, and her husband's Jamaican. And she was telling a story. They live in Winston-Salem. She was talking about how recently they were at a party or whatever with people that didn't know him. And even though he's already spoken, they're like, "Oh, do you have a Jamaican accent?" Yeah. What kind of question is that?
Yeah.
First of all, just listen to him talk.
Right. How perceptive of you.
But him being an immigrant, he did the same thing. He tried to start learning how to speak more acceptably to the population that he was living around, and that's just messed up.
I have a cousin that lives in Mississippi, and her husband's from England. And so he's speaking, he has a British accent in Mississippi.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So and he battles some of the same stuff, and it's just so frustrating that people are not listening to anything you're saying. Like, they're not hearing you. They're just
or maybe the ways they hear it. Because you saying that other regions, other accents might not get that in the United States. Because to me, I really struggle listening to Minnesotans and people from the Dakotas talk, because it's so dry and elongated and slow. Yeah. Whereas down here, people are storytellers. Mississippi, so there's like an aliveness to it. But no one really points out a Minnesotan accent or a Dakotan accent.
Also, I don't think they associate it with being uneducated.
That's exactly where I was going to go. You're not less intelligent. So
right.
How you're listening to someone from Kentucky, it's what you're deciding about them. Yeah. And as egregious as it is sometimes to listen to people from New England talk, to be honest, most people don't go, that means they're unintelligent. Right. And how sad. Yeah. Because again, look at all the writers that have thick accents in Eastern Kentucky that are brilliant. It's one of my pet peeves in life in general.
It is very frustrating.
And here it is prominent, and it's weird. And people that vacation in Franklin, and the way that they almost like start to, like get excited about these accents. I'm just like, wait, y'all are weird. Like, you need to get out more. But yeah, that's a good point. And I think the homesickness thing was what really struck me in Clay's quilt.
Yeah.
Of just that wanting to leave, but then do you really?
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about the mountains. I don't know what it is.
You just come back.
You just come back.
You know?
I mean, it
is remarkable to me. Like I said,
yeah.
Spending time in Pikeville, seeing the generations of families still living amongst each other is so weird to me just because I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And I hope people from here, not that lives are perfect or that families are not complicated, but there is something really amazing about that, to have that connection to a place.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think I just, I respect it. And I want to know about it, because people showing me their hometown or what it was like to live on the same street as like 5 different relatives, that's unimaginable for me. And so to picture that is really cool. But yeah, so that's a good pick for Eastern Kentucky, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
So what's next?
I think I'll probably do, these probably came after, Robert Guyp's Trampoline. Published in 2015. Man, I don't even know what to say about this.
You
book.
love this one.
I absolutely I love this whole trilogy.
Yeah.
But I had to start with the first one because I just felt natural. But I think so. The main character, Don Jewel, this was the first time that I had seen. I think the opioid epidemic and the impacts of that depicted in a novel, because Dawn Jewel, she's living with her grandma. Her mother is struggling with substance use. I think actually in this book, maybe, or Trampoline, is the first time Dawn sees OxyContin. She sees people using OxyContin and what that looks like, and it's strange to her. And she gives an account of like this is what's happening, and so I really related to Dawn Jewel, and I love the trilogy because Dawn Jewel is pretty much my age. So by the time Pop comes out, we're the same age, So there's that progression, and then I think, Robert does such a beautiful job with dialogue. I don't know that there's anybody that writes Eastern Kentucky dialogue better.
It's remarkable.
Than Robert Guyp.
I think we were talking a few days ago about that the way in which he writes should be spoken,
Yeah. Yeah, and once you hear him,
performed.
if you ever have the pleasure of hearing him read at an event, any book that you read of his after that, you will hear in his voice, because it's very
it's true.
It's very back and forth, like we speak here. It's been not a lot of he said, I said, she said, it's very just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like the conversation here, like you would do it, if it's almost written like a script.
Yeah,
like theater,
it's true.
In a way.
It feels performative.
It feels very performative.
And it's unique in that way, I think. And Robert, he's just so smart with it, you know. And these are really, I didn't know about this till I moved to Franklin, and people started telling me about Robert Guyp, and I was like, all right, I'll give this dude a shot, And I was like, who is this guy? That's how I feel about a lot of these authors that I learn about around here. Is I'm like, why have I not known about you for much longer? But that's pretty cool to have that life progression, the age similarity.
Yeah.
That's not very common.
No. And then you get these wonderful sketches. I know you can't see that in podcast land. That's why you have to go out and purchase these books.
Exactly.
But you get these wonderful sketches. It's an illustrated novel, so I don't know. I liked everything he did with it. I think it almost created a new genre for Appalachian literature.
That's true.
And it's super important. He tackles a lot of tough subject matter, from the opioid crisis to Dawn Jewel's grandma is an environmental activist, and she's protesting the mining industry. And I think it just covers a whole lot in this book and through the whole trilogy. He tackles a lot of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to know Robert more because talking with him when he was at City Lights and hearing him read,
Yeah.
he's a person you want to listen to,
Yeah.
you know? And part of it's because of the way he talks, but it's, he's just a thoughtful person, and that comes out in these stories.
Yeah.
And I think these are really unique books, and I try to sell them anytime I can now that I'm working at City Lights and people come, because I still feel like on the low, there's a lot of people that would love these that just might not know about them.
Yeah.
And so, and especially if people from out of the region, that I can get people, it catches their eye, especially with the illustrations. So that's pretty cool. And you're friends with Robert too.
Yeah.
So that helps.
Yeah, that helps.
Knowing that who the person is.
But I wasn't friends with Robert when I read this. I mean, that was in 2015 when this came out.
When did you meet him?
So I went to, and I've tried to figure out, I guess I could look at the timeline for the settlement school, but I went to the 40th anniversary celebration for the Appalachian Writers Workshop with my mom. And on Thursday night, when they do the keynote, the community's invited. Anybody can come. And so we had bought tickets. This was the 40th anniversary. Gurney was speaking. Lee Smith was there. Bobby Ann Mason was there. And there was a band called the Wooks out of Lexington that played. And so I was a big fan of the Wooks and wanted to see them, but also fans of all these writers.
Yeah.
And so we bought tickets and went. And Robert was at the Writers Workshop like he was, a student, a participant that year. And I saw him and had read this book. It wasn't long after I'd read this book. Again, went up and was like, hey, love your work.
Yeah.
Scared to death to talk to him. He probably doesn't remember that night. He probably doesn't remember meeting me that night. But I just went up and introduced myself, and we kind of did our thing. And that was the first time I'd met him. He, like I said, he probably doesn't remember that. But we also met again at a TEDx event that they did in Corbin, Kentucky. Huh. So it was like a smaller scale TED Talk.
Yeah.
Where they had 5 or 6 people from the region give just mini TED Talks on whatever. And Robert gave one on the opioid epidemic. And I went up and talked to him after that. And we had a long conversation after that. That's probably, and that was, I don't know, 2018.
Okay.
Maybe.
Wow. See, man, you're really it's pretty cool how you had read a lot of these folks and then met them and formed these relationships later.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the special things about meeting writers that you admire. And then honestly, them not letting you down is a big thing. Like, to become friends with them, that's a really important thing. Because I feel like as a kid, I've met some people that disappointed me.
You're not supposed to meet your heroes, right? That's what they say.
Yeah, but I'm glad I never gave up on that. It's like, I guess some people can get jaded and be like, oh, everybody's going to be like that.
Yeah.
With a lot of these writers, they are like they think, like you think they 100%.
are. 100%.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a good reminder to keep selling these books out in the world, because they're very good and very important. And maybe someday they will be performed.
Yeah. True.
So we're going to go Lee Smith next?
We'll go Lee Smith next. And this is Fair and Tender Ladies, which I came to a little late in the game. I actually did not read this book until I opened the bookstore.
Wow.
And it, I don't know what the original, 1988's the original pub date on it. I would have been like 7 when this came out. This is probably not something a 7-year-old would be drawn to. But I read this because Silas House mentions this book in almost everything he does. And how important this novel was to him, how important Lee Smith was to him. And so I was like, when I opened the bookstore, I'm thinking, I got to put this on the top of my pile to be read.
Yeah.
And I just think it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful book. Most of it's written in letters, which I think is fascinating. I like any book that does just a little something different. You know?
Yeah.
When you think about Robert and his illustrations, and in this one, how it's written in letters.
So you could see why Silas was talking about it so much.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think she does. She does a beautiful job. I was looking for the time frame because it's been a while since I'd read this one. But But I think this is another really good example of the community. And and it's so funny because all of these I feel like touch on the same thing. It's love of place, it's community, it's family dynamics, it all the things that are important. It's the natural element. But they all do it in a way that doesn't make it feel redundant. Like, you don't feel like you're reading the same book again and again, but those things are so important and so prevalent in all of these books. And so I think that's what's fascinating to me is all the different ways that it's told from different perspectives and different point of views.
Yeah, well, I think it goes to like you even discovering your own voice.
Yeah.
It's like everyone in Appalachia has a story to tell. And the fact that it's a welcoming environment to do that, to me, I'm a sucker for the same story in a different way.
Yeah.
I think that, as you're saying, like, these books are singular, even if they touch on the same things. But again, it goes to your heart. You tend to read what is inside of you.
And I think that's one of the things that also was important to me about having a space where that could happen. And I felt like the bookstore was it. That, young people from this area who a lot of times are, wanting to get out of here and maybe questioning why they're staying and don't have that sense of pride and feel like they're less than because they're from here, that in this space with all these stories, hopefully that will change that narrative in their mind, that my story is worth telling. This place is important.
Yeah, it's kind of look at these people.
Exactly.
Right?
These are all examples of why this place is important.
And you got to think, similar to you, like, how many people don't read Lee Smith or don't know about Lee Smith stories? Again, it's another opportunity to present them.
And it's one of the biggest challenges for me when somebody comes in here and they're like, well, what would you recommend? What Appalachian novel or what local whatever would you recommend? To try to have to narrow that down is next to impossible for me.
Gosh.
And so I always have to come back with, I'm like, well, what do you like to read? Do you like historical fiction? And then I'll kind of go down the list.
You got to use those filters.
Yeah,
because otherwise it's overwhelming.
Historical fiction, I'm usually putting Even As We Breathe in their hand, and I'm like, do you like magical realism? Because I think Ashley Bloom's is a master at that. And then I'm putting her work into their hands, and I just go down the list of because they're all so important.
And that's it. You can't. You don't want to lump them all together either.
No.
Which is, it's the hard part of a bookseller, is like getting to that place where you're kind of at least in the ballpark of a story that would match what they're looking for. Because they're not. They touch on the same things. They're from the same region, but they have their own character. And so I think to kind of get down to the heart of what they're looking for, because just look at that. Look at all those shelves full of amazing books. But again, it's kind of going back to what the point of a bookstore is in a town like Hazard compared to Nashville. Like it's just, it is not the same, should not be, and it could not be the same experience coming in. So, if you get these people from across the world or different states that are coming in, you can get to this is the one that I'm going to give you. Yeah.
And I also try to make sure that people understand the diversity of voice also.
Yeah.
When I talk about it, I talk also about Carter Sickles' work, about Willie Carver's work, about Nima Avashia's work, about Frank X and Crystal, and the diversity in the voices, the different experiences that have come out of Central Appalachia. That it's not a singular voice or a singular experience. The landscape's the same, the connection is the same, but here's a trans writer, here's a black writer, here's a queer writer, that all, these are the experiences. And I think that's really important to me, is that not only are they Appalachian, but that there's a diversity here that a lot of people don't understand.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, again, Appalachia gets portrayed with this oneness.
Yeah, it's definitely not a monolith.
It's really frustrating when you do know how many different perspectives these authors bring. And so, it's and to be honest, until I moved to Franklin, I didn't know about Appalachian writers. And then to discover that whole world was like mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it's again, you get to, the beauty of a store like this is people walk in and their whole perspective of a region could change.
And
be more complete.
And I don't even know that I intended it to be that. Like, I don't know that I was conscious of that in the beginning. But it's become a safe space for people. You know, when Nima came and did her signing here, there was a young lady that showed up here that had Nima sign her book, and she had grown up here and wasn't able to come out. It was tough to be queer during that time in Appalachia, and just how impactful Nima's book was for her. And then, you know, she thanked me for creating a safe space where this could happen. And that wasn't like a conscious effort on my part. I think I just wanted to show a true reflection of the region. Like, this might be what you think you know, but this is really what's happening.
Yeah.
And by doing that, then it became a place where people felt comfortable from all walks of life.
You know, it begs the question, right? If not here, then where?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, if anybody ever has an idea like that is coming from that place of wanting to create a space, do it. Because you're feeling that way because there isn't one.
Yeah.
So it's not everybody has the same resources or to necessarily start a bookstore, but whatever the idea is, it usually is coming from a lack.
Yeah.
And, you know, back to the origin story of this place, it's not just, we need a bookstore.
Yeah.
It's much, much larger than that.
And you never know what's going to happen. Like, that's the thing that's crazy. Like, when I sat down to open this bookstore, I figured up how much I needed to make a day to sit in the store and work on my manuscript. I was like, okay, I want to finish this book. So how much do I have to make every day just to pay the bills and buy me lunch? That's the mindset I had. It wasn't like I'm like, oh, I'm going to start this chain of Read Spotted Newts in Appalachia. Like, that's not, I didn't have some grand business plan. It was just like, I want to sell books. I can work on my manuscript. How much money do I have to make to do that? Like, that was the vision.
It's that simple. Yeah.
Very, very small vision. And I do not get to work on the manuscript. I would say that. Spoiler alert.
Maybe that's a good thing in a way.
This took a life of its own. Yeah, I don't get to do that.
But maybe in some ways it helped. I feel like people get too big in their minds about an idea, so they can't just do the basics well. So the first thing is, even if it's 250 square feet, start a store.
Yeah.
You know, John Evans at Lemuria in Jackson, Mississippi, started in an apartment building.
Yeah.
Converted apartment, started selling books. And now he's in a huge space in Jackson. But if you get too overexcited about what you could do, what it could become, it kind of distracts from, let's just do this really well right now and then let it flourish as it happens.
And I think that's exactly what happened here. It was just, let's just do this and then this. And then, I mean, it's been a very slow process that has been building. And also it allowed me, because I was the only one at that time working, to establish relationships with my customer base. And so I didn't know what to carry. I didn't know what to bring in here. And so I had to talk to everybody that came in and was like, well, what do you want to see? Yeah. What books do you want in here? Because this is your bookstore. Like, what do you want?
Yeah, it's a community space.
Exactly. I wanted it to be a community space. And so...
you become a really good listener.
Yeah. Oh, sometimes these chairs that we're sitting in right here feel very much like a therapist office on a lot of days.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
It gives that vibe for sure. Well, you got one more here,
I do,
which is a big one.
I'll save the best for last. This is Gurney Norman's kinfolks, the Wilgus stories. And actually, one of these, there's a short film called Fat Monroe that is an adaptation from one of these stories. And so this is a collection of short stories. I would argue some of the most beautiful short stories ever written. And I don't think I'm the only one that feels that way. I think
You're not.
I think this is probably, like, for me, the quintessential short story collection. If I were going to write short stories, this is where I would go to be like the Bible of short stories.
Wow.
And again, I think, for me, I also could see myself in Wilgus. Like the characters that he surrounded himself with, and that he grew up with, Not Right in particular, when they're drinking and smoking, and Wilgus, is battling about with the cigar and whether to smoke the cigar. And like, these are people I know. Like, these are family members. And so I felt like, I don't know. I think and this was published in 1977. So,
yeah.
Again, Wilgus, unlike Don Jewel, who I felt like was exactly growing up, we were the same age. It was the same experiences. Wilgus, even though I could see myself in him, in his character, we did not grow up in the same time period, And so I think, to me, that's the theme, that there's at least somebody in all of these books that I can see myself in, no matter what the time frame is. And I can't really say that for every piece of literature, but with Appalachian literature, I'm pretty confident in saying that there's something that I deeply connect to in any piece of Appalachian literature. And kinfolks I go back to a lot. Sometimes, it's accessible.
Yeah.
The stories are short and they're easy, and I can go back to kinfolks a lot. But also Divine Right's Trip, which was Gurney's novel. And that's very much about wanting to go home. It's about, the character in that novel is in California and is trying to get back to Eastern Kentucky. And that's a whole novel about wanting to go home.
Yes, tale as old as time, really.
Yeah.
And I think it's a magnetism. And I think sometimes, I don't know, I'm speculating a little bit.
Yeah.
But from someone who will never go to my home, because I don't see it that way as home, sometimes it's talked about as the relationships to home are always like it's a bad thing that you want to go home because it's about comfort in a negative way, right? You're not spreading your wings. You're not fulfilling your potential. But the older I get, I don't buy that. And I don't know why it was sold that way. Because even growing up in Dayton, there was a lot of this, the world's better out there.
Yeah.
And now that I've seen some of my friends leave and go back, and the reasons they did, I understand more the perspective of the good reasons you would come home. It's not always a toxic thing. It's not always a nostalgia in a negative way. A lot of it, at least in Appalachia, it's a values thing.
Yeah. It's
where your heart is. And that, to me, is, I think maybe people like you and other writers that have these stories of coming home and investing in home, that it encourages other people. This is a place worth staying.
Right. And I think that's what I'm seeing a lot here, is a lot of the people who are involved in this community development and downtown revitalization are younger people that have gone away. They left, they went to college. They saw a different way of life, experienced a different way of life, and then kind of used that as a model to bring it back and be like, okay, here are some things that I saw while I was out in the world that I can bring back home and use in my own community. But there was always this narrative of like, to be successful, you have to leave. I mean, that was the motto for this area for a long time. That's what I was fed. To be successful, you have to leave. And unfortunately, I think we had a huge period where it led to a brain drain
Yeah.
for Eastern Kentucky. But I'm hoping that narrative changes. And I have a son who's 11, and a lot of the work I'm doing, I think about him. I think about I'm doing this work, so in 6 years when he has to make a decision about where he wants to be and where he wants to go, and I will never tell him he's a failure if he stays here. If he wants to leave, I'll accept that too, because it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure he knows that it's okay, that if he stays here, that it doesn't make him less than any of his counterparts that go off and do things in other parts of the world, and trying to make sure that he has opportunity and he can stay here.
And I think that's an important thing is feeling like there are things you can do in a place with what you're good at and what you enjoy. And that's why it's important that your generation is showing these younger kids, hey, this is a place that you can build something and it can do really well.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard work and it'll be a lot different than going off to a bigger city and, all these other possibilities, but that it's a good choice.
Yeah.
It can be a good choice.
Yeah.
I'm wondering then, like, how you feel like your son's relationship to this place is different than yours when you were growing up, even more than just staying and leaving. Do you feel like there are differences because of your own journey to wondering if this is a place you should be and then investing so much in it?
Yeah, I think so. One of the biggest differences I think I see for him is, I still feel like at my age, I still had one foot in a generation that was drastically different from the one I was growing up in. Like there were people in my life who, canned vegetables and grew a garden and, I saw a lot of the old ways. And he doesn't have a whole lot of that in his life. He doesn't have that experience of traditional music and that sort of thing. That connection to. So I wonder about that, how that will shape how he feels about this place. Because those were some of the places where I was really proud, that are traditional foodways and music and. I mean, that's really the culture of the place. And I don't know how much he's getting of that.
Yeah. It's looking at the Foxfire books.
Yeah.
Because the first book I read for a book club in Franklin when I moved there was Aunt Airy. And her whole story was a window for me into a time in my region, right over the border that I couldn't even fathom.
Yeah.
All the old-timey ways. And how this woman, lived not 20 minutes from where I live and had been there once in like 50 years, because these are real mountain people.
Yeah.
And the slow way of doing things.
Yeah.
No matter how much technology was becoming more accessible, that there was some sort of, pride or virtue in still doing things.
Yeah, and I don't know that he has that because he's of the generation that's fully immersed in technology. I mean, I'm 43, so I had a balance of that. For the first half of my life, I didn't have a home computer until I was in high school. So I think there was a balance, and I guess it'll be different for him, but that's something I think about. But also, like, he won't ever remember a coal economy.
That's weird to think about.
It is weird to think about. And I don't know that it just dawns on me occasionally of like, when was the last time I saw a coal truck and how prevalent they were when I was growing up? Or, men in the afternoon, you go to any gas station in Eastern Kentucky at like 6:00 and you see the miners coming in and like, he won't see any of that. He hasn't seen any of that. He won't know a coal economy. So everything he's going to know about Central Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky is going to be in a post-coal economy. And what's that going to look like? And the fact that he's already, he's experienced a major flood, and I mean, a major devastating flood. And it was the first one in my lifetime And we experienced together, because I grew up hearing about all the flood, 57 flood and the 20, and my grandpa had
There's a lot of them.
4 floods before there were lakes put in, to do some kind of flood control. But, experiencing the climate change here, and it's different. It just is.
Yeah, I also read an article of yours a few years ago, 2022, where you wrote about what if a 100-year flood is happening every year or every few years, then what is... But I think, again, it just goes to how important it is that your generation still gives these stories so that young people are understanding the context of where they're growing up.
Right.
Like, coal might not be here, but it always is going to be. You know what I mean? That's not...
It's left us with a lasting impact.
And floods are going to happen.
Yeah.
So helping them understand from a family, even history perspective, why this happens.
Yeah.
And what you can do about it, I think, is important too. Like, I've talked to a lot of people, well, especially in Pikeville, my friend's dad is helping figure out if this is going to happen. We got to reshape how we live here, where we live. And that's a really hard thing to tell people to move.
Yeah.
Because of the threat of dying.
Yeah.
But if that's a real thing, how do you balance the pride of being from this holler, right? And living here and having affection for it and history. But what if it drowns you?
Right,
it's such a complicated thing.
But also, that's tough. And the likelihood that whatever holler you're living in, you are probably at this point 7th or 8th generation to have lived there. And then to say, you're going to have to walk away from this because the likelihood that it's going to be catastrophic flooding is high. So you're going to have to move to higher ground. That's tough. That's a tough conversation to have. And lots of people are just willing to take the risk. They'd rather stay on family land.
That's what I've learned.
Than move to higher ground.
I've had, talking about understanding a different perspective, I've had to try to understand that.
Yeah.
I can't ever because I'm not in that position. But to choose that over leaving is in some ways good.
Yeah.
But could never imagine making that call.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is a very unique place.
It is. And I'm excited about where we're going. I think, it's we're kind of charting our own path at this point,
How great it is to get on the ground floor of that.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. There's a lot of good work happening, and I'm really grateful to be involved. And I'm happy I'm in a place, and I've said this in almost every interview, and I want to make sure because it's important to me that, I alluded earlier to running amok around here when I was using, and I was very much a drain on my community. I was definitely not contributing in any way to the community.
Yeah.
And so now I feel like, everything that I do and everything I'm a part of is a way of making amends to a region that I was not very kind to early on. So that's the most important part to me.